You're watching News Central Television, and we're still live at the Nigeria Economic Summit, the 31st edition. And we've been engaging in very insightful conversations with stakeholders in the Nigerian economy, from government to private sector. And we have a very important player here with us in the Nigerian private sector. I am talking about the CEO, APM Terminals Nigeria, Mr. Frederick Clinker. A warm welcome to you, and thanks for joining us.
Thank you very much for having me.
Yeah. Let's talk about bridging the gap. Nigeria faces a massive infrastructure funding deficit. How can private sector players like APM Terminals contribute more strategically to closing this gap, especially in terms of ports, logistics, and transport connectivity?
Thank you very much. So we, as a global container terminal operator, part of the Maersk Group, has, you can say, as our primary customers is actually the governments and the countries that we serve. We have the privilege to service critical infrastructure, and therefore we see it very much an obligation on our side as well to help our host nations in, exactly as you say, bridging those infrastructure gaps, what they may be. As you say, Nigeria definitely has a large demand upbuilt through many years for more port infrastructure. We have invested more than 600 million in our two main seaports in Nigeria, and we have plans to invest double that amount over the coming years. I think what we can contribute the most, aside from bringing our operational expertise, is also to have a long-term view in our discussions with the government. So not just look at the next 2 to 3 years ahead, but actually what is needed the next 2-3 decades ahead.
You've contributed immensely, I must say, in investing in infrastructure projects in Nigeria. Now, beyond traditional public-private partnerships, what innovative financing models do you believe can unlock sustainable infrastructure investment in Nigeria, thinking long-term, like you mentioned?
Yeah, I think there are two things to say, actually, about the funding part. I think it was mentioned on several other panels that I've attended today, is that very popular, that money is not the problem. That there's plenty of investments, money, funding available from various actors. The issue is that there's, of course, competition for projects. There's also a lack of bankable projects. So it's really a
lack of bankable projects. So what do you mean?
So I mean, if you look at the number of projects within our sector that's actually been, say, launched within the last few years, it's actually very, very few. I think the deep sea port in Lekki is the last example, and is, as we talked about before, pretty far from bridging the infrastructure gap. Lekki is supporting, but it's not enough. So I think the other element to it is the government can actually help private investors overcome some of the hurdles by maybe looking at participating in infrastructure. In some cases, I think the Honorable Minister for Communication and Digital Economy yesterday talked about doing investments which are beyond the beaten path, so to speak, to lead the way for the private actors to see the commercial benefit when the government has actually invested in some of the, you can say, hard parts, the things that are difficult to bank. I think within in the port industry, if I zoom in on that, definitely I think there are space for the government to participate as a partner, to provide funding for projects, to maybe take on some of the initial investments in some of the more expensive port infrastructure. The port of Tangier in Morocco is an example of that, where the government went ahead and invested in the port infrastructure, quay wall stretching, and then bringing in private investors to do the rest.
Great. Now let's talk about investor confidence. Policy inconsistency and regulatory uncertainty often deter investors. From your perspective, what specific policy shifts or frameworks would help build investor confidence in Nigeria's infrastructure space?
Yeah, I think, as you say, it is a challenge for many investors to navigate the environment. I think that there's probably a need for a reform of how public partnerships are actually run. That there's a number of institutions which each from good intentions, but try to support and regulate in that sphere, and that actually makes it complicated for private investors. Do you talk to BPE? Do you talk to ICRC? Is Mafia player? That there's a number of institutions that actually, and again, out of good intentions, but actually complicates the picture.
So, what example, if you could look at Africa and say, look, we can learn lessons from this country in their model and how they've been successful and tried over time, what countries would you say we could pick up lessons from it?
I mentioned Morocco before, and I also have personal experience having worked in the port of Tangier earlier in my career. Here you're dealing with one very much empowered entity called TMSA that, on behalf of the central government, is the authority that you deal with, and they coordinate all efforts when it comes to government side. So it's basically, popular speaking, a one-stop shop.
Oh, great. Now, how can Nigeria balance the inflow of foreign capital with strengthening local participation, ensuring that Nigerians are not just beneficiaries, but active partners in infrastructure financing and development?
Yeah, no, but I think one of the strong sides of the Nigerian economy is actually that the banking sector is very well developed and actually very well financed as well. And that's what I said. There's actually quite a lot of money available. But I think many Nigerian banks probably shy away as well for the same reasons that international investors are also tiptoeing around big infrastructure projects, because they lack the long-term visibility. And you mentioned the issues around regulation. One of the key things that you require is to have a regular regime for how your commercial terms are regulated. And that's especially important when you operate in a, say, rather volatile, inflationary and foreign exchange environment.
Stability.
Yeah, and well, I mean, you operate in countries like Nigeria, you need to be able to stomach a certain amount of instability. But what you need to be able to do is still, when inflation is running at, say, 30%, you need to be able to at least be able to increase your prices. Not saying that you necessarily need to match inflation, but at least you need to be able to adjust. And when that is regulated, then that becomes a challenge.
Finally, Mr. Clinker, as global trends move towards greener and smarter infrastructure, how is APM Terminals integrating sustainability and technology into operations in Nigeria and your long-term investment strategy?
Yeah. No, thank you very much for that question, because that is very close to our hearts in APM Terminals. Our group has a net zero ambition by 2040. That means that all of the investments that we make in equipment and infrastructure basically needs to be carbon neutral. In our world, that means it needs to be electric equipment. Today, most of our terminal handling equipment operates on diesel, but anything that we will invest in substantially in the coming years will be electric equipment.
And that policy emanated from it's part of your work culture. It's not government regulatory driven, forcing you to be green and sustainable.
No. Maersk is a signatory to the UN Compact, and we believe that not only is it the right thing to do, we are a value-driven company, but it is actually also, by time, going to be good business. we believe that this is an area that will face increasing international regulation, and therefore we want to be the first movers and actually lead the industries that we participate in making that green transition.
Thank you so much for your time, CEO APM Terminals Nigeria, Mr. Frederick Klinker. It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you very much.